Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the BrewDeck Podcast. On today's episode, we are sitting down with Perfectly Dosed and Third Space Brewing to discuss functional beverages, THC, CBD, and how to get into that space. All right. Well, let's get into it. We can start with some introductions. Why don't we start with Perfectly Dosed? Ricky, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Justine. Happy to be here. My name's Ricky. I am the revenue director at Perfectly Dosed. I've been with the team for about 2 years. And in that time, I've worked with probably a few hundred breweries at this point to kind of go all the way from kicking the tires on THC drinks to bringing something to market and scaling.
Awesome.
And I'm Glenn McElfresh. I'm one of the co-founders of Perfectly Dosed, signed our first brewery clients, and I'm our head of government affairs for the company.
So I'll jump in. I'm Andy Gale, co-founder and president of Third Space Brewing. We are located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we produce craft beer as well as other beverages, including a line of drinks called Headspace, which are hemp-derived THC beverages. And we sell our products throughout the state of Wisconsin and to bars, restaurants, liquor stores, grocery stores, and then at 4 retail locations that we operate here in the Milwaukee area.
I'm Kevin Wright. I'm Andy's business partner, co-founder of Brewmaster at Third Space, work on the team that produces everything.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here today. I guess let's kick it off with the beginning question is, who is Perfectly Dosed and what do you do?
It's a great question. I'll kick us off there. Perfectly Dosed, we are an emulsion vendor. Really what we're making is the ingredient that powers THC, CBD, other hemp-derived beverages in its natural form. THC, CBD, these things are oils coming from the hemp plant, and oils don't mix with water, so it makes it challenging to make a beverage. Our secret sauce is turning that into a beverage.
And what I'd add to that is that we really just want to be partners. You know, I grew up in a house where my dad started a business and it failed. And I saw firsthand how the negative impact that could make on just families. And I made it kind of my mission to help change that for as many people as we could. And, most breweries are small businesses. And obviously now as trends are changing, like you're seeing more breweries shut down than ever before. So, we're a partner, whether it's like helping a smaller brewery just get started, a bigger one figure out how to scale, or as I've done in the case of Andy, head up and be on a panel so that we can make sure that we get the right regulation at the federal level. We want to help all of our friends in the industry just stick around and be a great third space for many years to come.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess with your products from Perfectly Dosed, understanding what they are. So the difference between THC, CBD, and specifically your dosing recommendations and everything. Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so we've got a range of products. At the moment, they're all hemp-derived cannabinoids. Hemp, I guess taking a step back, when you're talking about cannabis broadly speaking, cannabis encapsulates both marijuana and hemp. The two plants are extremely similar. The difference in the eyes of the federal government is how much THC there is in the plant when it's grown and harvested. Hemp is defined as less than 0.3% THC, and all of the inputs that Perfectly Dosed works with are hemp-derived. We have all of the documentation, chains of custody, and things of the sort to kind of show where the hemp is coming from. And then within the hemp plant, you have a range of different cannabinoids. You have THC, which is what contributes to psychoactive effects, and you've got CBD, which is more of a body and muscle relaxant. Those are probably the two most popular, but there are several minor cannabinoids, CBN, CBG, CBC. In the mix as well. We emulsify all of those, turn it into a liquid ingredient that's 5% potency, meaning every 50 milligrams of our emulsion has, or every gram of emulsion has 50 milligrams of THC in it. It's as easy as kind of just mixing it into a non-alcoholic beverage and packaging. I mean, few additional steps in there as well, but for sake of conversation right now, just drop it in and mix.
And I'll kind of take the dosing recommendation one. I think we've, as an ingredient company, it'd be like if a hop company said, hey, here's how many IBUs you should make your beer, right? Like we've had to learn the delicate balance of helping our clients make what their customers want and making sure that we don't kind of get in the way of that too much. I think the first and most important thing that we recommend is make sure you're following your state law, right? So in states like Minnesota, where there's a lot of really solid regulation out there because of the craft brewing community, shout out Bob Galligan, there's 10 milligrams per can, right? In a state like Wisconsin, and this is Randy and Kevin can share, like there is really not a ton of regulation, and that's something that I think we all desperately want. And in Illinois, there's nothing right now, but there are requirements on the type of inputs you can have. So follow state law is the most important one. And then we always recommend starting lower. But as Andy and Kevin can speak to better than us, like consumers, will tell you what to make. And any good business knows to listen to your customers, the people that are coming in and giving you their hard-earned dollars. And sometimes that's higher than what people may initially think. And that's always an interesting question. And folks like Andy and Kevin have done an amazing job of like balancing products that are, appealing to a wide variety of consumers. It's not easy, but we always say start low, go slow, and work on making a really safe product, work on making a product that's reliable and consistent, and then just follow the state law.
And it's a wide variety of consumers as well as a wide variety of occasions too, right? Like similar to beer, you're going to have different ABVs depending on kind of what occasion, what you're looking for. Same can be true with hemp beverages, which leads me to kind of why I mentioned the CBD and minor cannabinoids as well. Could be an interesting way to kind of tweak the effects that you're going after in your product.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I guess this question I'll throw to Andy and Kevin. With the industry kind of moving into those functional beverages category, what made you decide to break into doing the THC, CBD beverages and getting into that functional game?
Yeah, I mean, we're always at Third Space looking at ways to innovate in the products that we offer and the experiences that we offer. Sometimes that's, a new, interesting brewing technique for beer, and sometimes it's moving into a completely alternative beverage altogether. So that's obviously what the case was here, was sort of watching where the consumer trends are going in some ways. I mean, they're still drinking beer, but there are plenty of consumers out there that are looking for alternatives. We've seen the rise of cannabis and cannabis legal, marijuana legal states, the popularity there, and that we thought there might be a market for a consumer that wanted a legal path to consuming those products in the state of Wisconsin. And so we dipped our toe in the water with some experiments in this product space, just selling it out of our tap room back in 2023. And like Glenn said, we saw what the consumer wanted, and they wanted this product and they wanted a lot of it. And so then we decided to ramp up and scale to distribute across the state of Wisconsin.
Awesome. So I guess what surprised you most after launching this beverage and everything in this space? And how long have you been in this space, and how long have you had this product?
So we launched the product in late 2023. So around November 2023. So we'll be coming up on, I guess, almost 3 years here in the fall. But we started just selling it out of our tap room. With one beverage, 5 milligram product. And we found pretty quickly, as Glenn mentioned, there were a lot of people who gravitated towards the 5 milligram product, but there were others who were clamoring for higher dosages. And so we started to expand our product line. And now we sell 5 milligram, 10 milligram, and 25 milligram products. And we have multiple flavors within most of those. So I'd say that my surprise was actually that the demand for higher doses. I thought this was going to be treated more like sessionable, alcohol products where people wanted to drink maybe multiple cans at lower dosage levels. But we're finding that I think it's a more mature cannabis user who's been gravitating towards these products at this stage. And so they've been demanding higher dosages. We're hopeful as this industry continues to grow that it's going to reach a wider audience, and we're going to find new customers who are looking for those lower doses. But we'll see where it goes from here.
I was just looking in my emails, Kevin. My first email from you was August 22nd, 2023. And I think back to that time and I'm like, wow, that feels like decades ago. So yeah, really appreciate you guys. It has been a long.
Andy, real quick, I want to jump back to something that you had mentioned of kind of the different products and the mix you guys have. Do you see that there are, I guess, different channels where you're seeing those beverages perform better, where maybe the tap room, the 5 milligrams sell really well, whereas distribution, you see the higher dose products sell really well, or is the mix pretty consistent throughout?
Main difference is really on-premise versus off-premise. So, bars and restaurants that are serving these products versus people who are taking them home to enjoy at their house or their parties or their other occasions. So the lower dose beverages are selling more on the on-premise, where people are out and about and maybe they're driving later, or maybe they're also consuming other things. And so they might go for the lower dose, whereas people who are purchasing to go for, use outside of a public setting might be looking for those higher dosages. But across, in terms of the retail outlets that we sell to in the distribution marketplace, we're not really seeing a difference other than, certain retailers have chosen not to carry the higher dose products, and others have chosen not to carry the lower dose products because they've seen the rate of sale on the higher dose.
Yeah,
Wisconsin's
absolutely.
weird like that. It's one of the only states I've heard of where like there will be retailers. So I went to school at UW-Madison. And so like my wife and I go to Madison all the time. Like the liquor stores in Monona will not sell anything less than a 10 milligram. And it's unique because it's cutting off this whole, new consumer base, right? The first timer or the person that wants to drink a couple or share it with their friends. Andy's not kidding when he says there are retailers that will not carry those lower potency products.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I think what's interesting there is how much of this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where the retailer is saying, we want the 10 milligram because that's what's selling. And they may have made that choice before they gave a chance for those new consumers to come in that were looking for lower doses. And so, now what's selling, it's the higher doses because that's what's on the shelf. So it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. I really have a belief that if this industry is going to continue to achieve what it could achieve in terms of growth across the market, is the lower dose products. It's getting into a more mainstream consumer, is people who might not be more heavy cannabis users that maybe want to just kind of have something additional to kind of add to their occasion and to their experience that they want a lower dose. And so unfortunately, I think there's a little bit of a detriment to that growth for the industry by us focusing on those higher doses at this time. And I'm hopeful that, once we get the regulations we need in place to allow this industry to continue and thrive, that we can get back to trying to grow it with a wide range of dosages for different consumers and different occasions.
Yeah. And I guess going back to 2023, when you wanted to introduce this into your line, was there any changes to your production facility that you needed to do in order to bring this live for you?
I can take that one. We didn't have to do any changes to our facility, like physically. We had all the equipment that we needed to make the type of products that we were planning to make. The main difference is in the regulation. So TTB regulates alcohol and alcohol labeling, and these products fall under FDA label regulation. So we had to read up on FDA label requirements to make sure that the labels we were putting on them were compliant. But from a production standpoint, we had everything we needed.
Awesome.
And what I would add to that too is that like back then in 2023, it's not like there were a lot of like big national brands making hemp. Like I think at the time, like you were probably one of the first, Kevin, if not the first brewery in Wisconsin to really go for a THC beverage. I think a mutual friend of ours introduced us, Joe Wells, who was at Fair State. And I think for a long period of time, nobody in the world had made more hemp beverages than him. So it was just, I wasn't around the early stages of craft beer. From what I've heard, it was like that very collaborative period where people were like, hey, how does this work? How does that work? And a fair bit of trial and error, but a lot more trial and a lot less error.
There was some error.
Yeah, and we
Always
weren't the first in Wisconsin either. We're not going to take credit for that, but we were one of the first to get into pretty wide distribution. And that was, thankfully we had a solid brand presence on the beer side. And so we were able to build upon that to grow our Headspace brand. And that's, also a good example, maybe we'll get into later, but, we actually put our name, Third Space Brewing, right on the label. We kind of, Headspace is a play off of Third Space. And the goal there was to do two things. One, it was to, get that wide distribution of the product because people trusted us as a solid quality producer of craft beer. But, also to signal that was to get them to buy it, but also to signal to them that this was a safe product that they could trust because they knew it was coming from, a craft beverage producer that they knew. And at the time, that actually felt like a pretty big risk because people didn't really know what these beverages, how they were going to be perceived in the marketplace by the general public. And there were some questions of whether or not, putting our name on it was a good idea and whether that could, potentially tarnish our brand for beer. And thankfully the public, responded in a very positive way. But we wanted to just put that out there from the beginning. And
I wish more people would do that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I wish more people would do that. Like, I think a lot of breweries in particular, maybe underestimate how much brand equity they've built over the years that they've been open, or they, have this idea for a brand that is maybe exciting. And, you're really just leaving a lot of trust, with your wholesale relationships, with your customers, like on the table. I tell people all the time, unless there's like a very clear and convincing reason to not use your existing brand name or a play off of it or like highlighting made by, like you're really leaving a lot of opportunity on the table to connect with your consumers. So again, you were definitely ahead of the curve there.
Yeah. And I mean, so I guess in the last, it's been almost 3 years for you now. What would you say has kind of changed either in your marketing or misconceptions that may have been out there from THC when you first launch to now?
I think we haven't changed a lot in terms of what we've been doing, but I think the consumer has evolved in the sense that people are getting more used to these beverages existing, understanding better what they are, why they're legal, how they're legal, what occasions they're meant for. But we've stuck with our same message from the beginning, that this is a quality product made by a brewer that you can trust. We went forward with a 0 calories, 0 sugar brand, so it's a potentially healthy alternative for folks to other things on the marketplace. And we've stuck with that branding and that sort of message all along, while also educating people. We have a QR code on the can that can take you to the stats in terms of the production side, in terms of like the dosage and things like that. But it also takes you to FAQs in terms of what is this product, what effect might it have on me physically, how should I consume this product if I've never done it before, things like that. So there's been a lot of education. And we're still doing that because, again, we're still introducing it to new customers, but we haven't changed much about what we do.
Awesome. Yeah. And I guess this question might be a little bit more for Glenn, but what was kind of a big misconception that a lot of people might have about the legalities when entering this space?
Boy, that's a loaded question, Justine. That's a really good one. So no, I appreciate it. I mean, look,
How much time do we have, Justine? Glenn could talk about this for the next hour.
And that's part of it too. And Andy knows I can be a bit of a windbag, so I'll keep it tight. But I mean, I think the biggest, it's not so much there were any misconceptions. I think it was how much, I think it was just like kind of a different kind of relationship than a lot of, brewers are used to. I mean, like there was like a lot of partnership, right? Like, hey, how do we build a new brand that may or may not incorporate our existing brand? How do we, deal with the fact that some states have a really regulated environment, others don't, and then we want to make a product that expands, right? Like there are some breweries that have spun out new companies and made their THC brand bigger than their brewery. I think, Climbing Kites in Iowa is like an amazing example of that. Stellar guys, stellar brewers that saw the opportunity and ran with it. It's the misconceptions are I think the biggest misconception that I think I saw early on was that this is a bad opportunity, right? There were, I think, people who thought that, we make beer and our consumers don't want to try THC. And I haven't met a single brewery that has regretted making a THC beverage yet. And there may be one, but I don't think anybody's consumers don't like getting high, at least some of them.
I think on top of that, it's fair to say that there is still a certain stigma around cannabis. It's definitely shifting, but as such, it can be uncomfortable to ask questions of what's the difference between marijuana and hemp, what's the difference between THC and CBD, and as you start looking at THC, what's the difference? There are a lot of different words being used. And it's a nascent industry, right? So a lot of these terms are still being defined themselves. So being unafraid to ask those questions, I think, is the biggest piece of it. And as consumers and producers start to accept it more, that becomes more commonplace. But I think that anyone who would try to kind of launch this without transparency as a core value isn't going to get very far with it. And that's a bad business model. And so the fact that we continue to see these things thrive and grow kind of proves the opposite.
Yeah. And I think when Glenn had mentioned just partnership, I think that's one of the biggest things in this industry I recognize is you have partnership from your ingredient supplier down to your brewer. And I think that same goes for when Country Malt partnered with Perfectly Dosed. We wanted to be that partnership so that, because we don't necessarily know all the questions or like the answers to those questions, but to have that partnership with your team at Perfectly Dosed, we're able to pass it along to the brewer and ensure that they're getting the correct information.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, you want to know someone's going to pick up the phone, right? When you have a problem.
Yeah. Or even just any of these questions with, again, those legalities and everything else, because it is a new space for a lot of people, especially when the craft beer has been around for so long. How do we get into these other areas?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll add to that. I mean, Glenn was really helpful to us in the early stages when we were opening up. And I was really trying to understand the legal side and also the production side and the safety side. And, knowing that there could be producers out there that were maybe, doing things not quite exactly the right way and others that were doing the right way. And I need to understand which was which. And so that was extremely helpful to educate us as a supplier and producer first, so that then we could make smart decisions about where we wanted to source, our emulsions from, and then also be able to educate our consumers so that they know that they can trust us because they can trust the entire supply chain.
I appreciate that, Andy. It means a lot, man. It definitely was a learning experience. It still is, but man, I swear, some of the early days were definitely very like, what is happening here? Every day was a new day.
Yeah. And I guess I'll be honest, I'm Canadian. And so our whole system's a lot different. But if you could give a little more information specifically about the perfectly dosed products, which sort of, as you mentioned, that there's different, like with the Delta 9, Delta, all the other Deltas and such, what you have settled on for your products, and then how it flows into what Andy and Kevin do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to have Glenn chime in at the end of this because a big part of what we are doing is kind of getting ready to set the marketplace as well as just build the marketplace for what kind of will be the most sustainable long term, both from a regulatory and a consumer standpoint. What I mean by that is that regulations are still being built around this industry, right? And we're fully in favor of that. We want to collaborate and make that happen. We want to make sure these are safe products. And so we're only offering naturally derived cannabinoids. What that means is that you can create THC both in an isomerized or a synthetic way, as well as just naturally derived straight from the plant. I'm not making any commentary on whether or not synthetic cannabinoids are dangerous. It's actually some pretty fascinating technology, but that's the direction that regulations are heading. And most consumers are obviously most comfortable without tons of education, knowing that's a naturally derived. So we work with naturally derived THC, which means that THC is coming directly from the hemp plant. It is the 0.3% that's naturally grown in the hemp plant. THC is the broad term for really any psychoactive compound that you have within the plant. That'll include Delta 8, it'll include Delta 9, it'll include Delta 10, and a handful of other variants. Delta 9 is really the most abundant one, though. It's what most consumers are looking after. The true difference to like dig into the chemistry between all of them is really where the different bonds are within that chemical compound. But there's been obviously a lot of confusion and information around Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10. What we're looking at is kind of the most robust and most naturally occurring part of the plant that is psychoactive when it comes to the THC. On top of that, we've got CBD. That's going to make up 60, 70, 80% of the plant. So super abundant in hemp. And then there are minor cannabinoids such as CBN, CBG, CBC that have different effects. CBN is known to be more relaxing. So it can be great for like a sleep aid type product. CBG, on the other hand, is more energizing. And we're pretty excited to be getting into the terpene space as well, which obviously brewers are super familiar with terpenes from a flavor and aroma standpoint, but they have some pretty interesting effects as well, where those terpenes are essentially going to interact with your body's nervous system, your endocannabinoid system, and prime that system to create a more kind of well-rounded effect when you're consuming THC, CBD, and other cannabinoids. I guess this is where I'll tap Glenn in to talk more about kind of the regulatory standpoint, Glenn, if you don't mind, and kind of like what we're seeing, what we're looking at, and how we're building a scalable system.
Yeah. And so when we started this, Minnesota was our core market, but then like obviously they're highly regulated up there. And they're a unique state in that they're one of the few states that allows isomerized THC, which is THC made from CBD. And again, to Ricky's point, I'm not going to comment on the safety because like that's an episode in and of itself. But, you know, we knew early on, and this is because I was a chief compliance officer at a cannabis company before starting Perfectly Dosed, that the natural cannabinoids, which are the cannabinoids that are made in the plant and extracted from the plant, are going to be the safest pathway forward and help us do all of the policy work that, you know, I've done. Somehow folks like Andy, who I didn't realize had any more hours in the day, have started to do. It's just the best angle, right? The best regulatory angle. And so we've always built with that approach to kind of try to skate where the puck is going. And that's kind of borne out to be true. And then also on the consumer side, when you start to dive into those esoteric cannabinoids, nobody knows what they are, right? Like unless you're just a connoisseur, you know, and again, I've been in the industry for a decade, so I am. But, you know, the regular person who's just coming home from work or like after a Brewers game on a Sunday, like they just want to relax and unwind, right? They want to drink something else, but maybe know they have to get up early. Like they just want the easy cannabinoids. And, you know, that's kind of how it's been on the demand side for us, right? Like in the same way, you know, Andy was saying he listens to consumers, so do we. We don't get a lot of requests for super custom minor cannabinoids. It's the easy peasy stuff because it's like Kevin doesn't need another ingredient to track and, you know, it keeps the bill of materials tight. So we listen to our customers, but also know like, hey, from a policy perspective, there's only one way to go, and that's just naturally derived cannabinoids.
Awesome. Appreciate that. And I guess the question I would put to Andy and Kevin, once you started kind of creating it, what was your path in terms of flavors and everything? Did you just kind of let the product speak for itself, or did you start kind of adding anything else to it?
I can take that one. like Andy mentioned, we decided pretty early on we wanted to do something that was, zero sugar, 0 calories, for the reason of differentiation, and also just to, solidify this is an adult beverage that, should be, in our opinion, placed next to the other adult beverages. And so, some products that have a lot of sugar and might appeal to younger consumers is not something that we want to make. But, so if you've got 0 cal, 0 sugar, the THC emulsion itself is essentially flavorless. So you had to add some kind of flavor to it. So we had been working a lot with some really high quality citrus flavor products that we really trusted and knew how they worked well. We've been doing like hop water, NA hop water products for a while using those. And so we built off of that and then expanded out from there for other flavors that we trust could be a strong, flavor component that people are going to enjoy and it's going to taste good.
Awesome. And I guess, what is one thing that you have either learned throughout this process or that you think that anyone else trying to get into this space as a brewery or such should know about before launching and think about before launching?
Yeah, I think the biggest learning curve for us was in the emulsion product itself and getting consistency. So as brewers, we are very in tune to our ingredients. We do a lot of work, whether it's selecting our hops, evaluating malt samples, things like that. There's lots of resources available to us to evaluate those raw materials. Whereas THC emulsion, I don't know if there's any, real resources out there ahead of time. And so that was a lot of learning. And as Glenn mentioned, I talked to a friend of mine in the industry that had at the time, as much experience as anybody else. And he was the original one that guided me towards Perfectly Dosed. But what we learned is, not all emulsions are the same in terms of the stability, the consistency, and the ease of use in your product. And so I think one thing that people will find as they start in this process is getting the dosing that they want to consistently be represented in the product is a challenge. There are some challenges around that. And, Wisconsin, we don't have any regulations in terms of required testing, but we've tested every single one of our batches with third-party independent labs since day one, because we feel that's the right thing to do. And we don't want to misrepresent and mislead consumers, if they think it's 5 milligrams and we screwed something up and it's actually a 10 milligram dose, that can be a big impact to them. So through those testings, we found that, we could get the dosing right with, once we learned our system, our process at the beginning, but then we saw that dose would decline over time. It would change. And so we would test these products at like 30 days or 90 days and we would see a difference. And so learning how to combat that and keep that dosing stable over time, that was the biggest learning curve for us. And it comes down to your emulsion supplier and the quality of that. And then a lot of the parameters that you're doing on the production side impact that as well.
Yeah. And to Kevin's point, I mean, I know we've worked on this stuff, so I can say from experience that there's thousands, if not millions, of variables that go into dosage target within a 12-ounce beverage, which is a very, very small percentage of the total volume. And so as such, you could experience some sort of potency loss if you're using sediment-prone ingredients and your ingredients now settling to the bottom of the tank. If you're not measuring things right or your scale's not zeroed appropriately, maybe some adhesion to your production system, whether it's the tank and the piping or the can liners, like there's a number of different things. Fortunately, Perfectly Dosed has been around long enough to kind of see a lot of these, if not all, and make some recommendations before those things happen. But even still, everyone's learning. And that's why we love working with Third Space, is being able to have that open conversation of figuring out where things are going wrong, where things are going right, and how we dial it in.
Awesome. And I mean, Third Space has now been in this area for 3 years. What's kind of your hopes and goals for the next, let's say 2, so that's 5 years after launching, and then maybe just 5 from now? What's kind of your hope with this product or this aspect of the functional beverage?
Well, our first hope is that it remains legal. So we have some work to do on the federal side right now to get some regulations passed and, affirm that this is a, safe and responsible industry that can and should continue to grow. So that's step one. And beyond that, it's very hard to look past that at this point. But yes, we would love to see this industry continue to grow. We'd love to see our Headspace line continue to grow. We have a lot of ideas for different flavor, things that we can do, different functional additives we can do. So there's a lot of things we put on pause while we wait out the regulatory landscape. So I think there's a lot to come. And I think there's other brewers and producers, not everyone's a brewer that's making these products, are doing the same thing. Everyone's kind of in a bit of a holding pattern as we wait to see where the regulatory landscape ends up. But As I mentioned earlier, my big hope for this industry is that we see a shift back towards lower dose products so that we can expand to a wider range of customers. I get a lot of people asking me every day, hey, why don't you make a 2 milligram? That's what I'd love to drink. And we don't, and mostly because that's what, the higher doses are what are selling, and that's what the retailers are asking for. But I think for this to go real mainstream, we want to have lower dose beverages available. But yeah, it's really about innovation and letting Kevin and his team cook in terms of coming up with new ideas for flavors and different compounds that we can add to make these fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I do know, is like you said, like we just need to keep with the governmental regulations. And it goes into that industry partnership aspect. The BA Hill Climb happens this year. They did it in February, and I think they're continuing it to do every February, where they go to Washington and they talk with state representatives and such. And I believe that the THC CBD conversation was quite big there. And it is just one of those things that you have to keep talking about and hope that things will stay as they are or get better.
Yeah. And if I could just chime in there for a sec, like one thing that has been so interesting is watching so many brewers come together on this one. I think like Andy and Kevin can probably speak to the multi-year battles that are had in Wisconsin with like various levels of the 3-tier system. I mean, I know I've seen it in Illinois. It's been like very fascinating to watch the dynamics there. But the federal level happened in November 12th of 2025. And very few people and businesses had been lobbying federally. So, and very, like not that many were even lobbying at the state level, but, more because it's like cheaper, more local. And so, the absolute just kind of outpouring of effort, right? Like Andy has done a ton. There are very, very few, if any, breweries that have done more than him. And I'm not just saying that because we're on a podcast together. Like I mean it. It has been really impressive. And, there's not a lot of time left, right? So, what I think one thing that's been a little surprising on the flip side of that is I've seen some other brewers that have, from time to time, like said, well, I'm a brewer. I don't care about THC. I don't make it. And it's like, this is one of those moments where it's like, these are small businesses, right? We are talking about other small businesses that this is keeping their doors open. This is keeping them making the beer that they know and love. And so I would just always encourage people to remember that, this is less about like what people are drinking and more about how your friends, how your colleagues are keeping open, right? Because it's hard out there for everyone. And like, this is something that is a real bright spot, whether you're participating in it or not. So it's been a very fascinating journey this year. And however it ends is going to be certainly a very interesting chapter of our lives, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one last sort of question I might ask is, what kind of are you most excited about, either in this industry or innovation-wise? And I'll put that kind of to both Perfectly Dosed and then the team from Third Space separately.
I'll go first. For me, I'm excited to see, I guess, just kind of normalization as well as increased accessibility to these sorts of products. I think that I'm someone who will always drink beer, and I like having that in my fridge, and I like that for certain occasions. But there are other occasions where THC is just a little bit more fitting for me. And I moved to Chicago to start working with Perfectly Dosed about 2 years ago. Every bar and restaurant that I went to when I first moved here, I would ask them if they had any THC drinks on the menu just to kind of see. And a lot of the time the answer was no. A lot of the time it was, that's not something we can do. And it's been really cool in the past 2 years to see that landscape shift pretty dramatically, where maybe a quarter, maybe even half of the bars and restaurants that I go to around the city now will carry them, or at least it's not at all uncommon to ask if you carry them. Everyone's aware of this. And so I mention it because I went to a concert venue here recently and was able to have a THC drink while I was at that concert venue. And just that kind of acceptance and innovation in kind of the ways that we're able to socialize, get together, create third spaces is pretty wonderful and exciting. And I think there's a lot more of that to come. And the sky's the limit in terms of the way we get there.
I mean, I can take it next. So for me, I am just like, I think I'm most excited to see how awesome it will be when we get something done federally. I just have to remain optimistic. I think the industry is going to come together. I think, the people who are in DC doing the work are spending the right dollars, having the right conversations and doing it as best as we can. And so that'll be really, really, really fun to enjoy that moment for a day and then get back to work innovating, right? Like I spent 7 years in Denver. There's a brewery out there called Crooked Stave, and they made some of the best sours, right? Like I love sour beers. I like sweet drinks. And like, I'm curious to see people just, who have previously maybe been hands off, like just get into the space, right? Like I can't wait to see different smaller breweries that make, like really novel beers that really are pushing the limits of innovation, just get into the space, right? Like all the fruity milkshake sours. Like I'm excited to see what's that in THC. I know Float House and Connecticut tried something like that. And then also like what the big dogs do, right? Like right now that is, there's not a ton of huge brands in the space and certainly not the strategic folks. Like I'm excited to see like, hey, what do they do, right? Is it going to be, a flop like we've seen some of the, some brands entrance into new categories, or is it going to be something that absolutely crushes? It'll just be a really interesting opportunity. And then how the interplay between THC and beer and spirits and wine over the coming years will just be a super fascinating, like real world experiment. I just can't wait.
Kevin, I feel like I've been stealing the mic, so you go next.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to just learning more about this stuff. Like I love, the learning aspect. And like I said, that the challenge with the potency and it declining over time, and then the different things that we did to learn how to fix that. Like just the more that this becomes a mainstream and stable and regulated industry, the more that we have the opportunity to learn about these products, and then that, learning and understanding helps drive the innovation and like what are the next things and next products, like once you understand something better. So I don't know, I like that side of it.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to a regulated marketplace, which is kind of similar to what Glenn and Kevin said, but not just the win of getting it legalized permanently, but actually having a truly regulated marketplace. I don't think we didn't realize how beneficial it is to have reasonable regulation in an industry until you don't have it. And I think it's created a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty in, how do you go to market? What are the guardrails around what your product looks like? And, we can trust ourselves to be good actors and make a quality, safe product, but we can't trust all of our competitors to do the same thing. And all it takes is, one or two bad actors, to spoil it for everybody else. And we need to get rid of that. So I'm looking forward to that regulated marketplace. We thrive in a very regulated craft beer world. And so I think we can thrive as a business that's doing it right in a very, heavily regulated, THC marketplace. So we're looking forward to that. And then once we have those guardrails in place, seeing what we can really do with this industry and where it can go. What are the, the highs that it can reach, pun intended. So excited to see where it goes.
Incredible.
Can't wait to see Headspace and SoFi.
Before my real final question, is there anything else anyone wanted to kind of touch on, or there was something that they were thinking of that they really, throughout the last hour, that they thought that they'd really like to say?
Yeah, I would love to take this opportunity to call your federal elected officials, right? You have 2 senators and 1 representative for every location of your business and for your residents, and those may not all be the same. So go to congress.gov, look up your elected official and call them. And tell them to pass legislation like the Barr-Craig bill that will preserve hemp beverages. Engage with your state craft brewers guild. They're a great resource across the country, and engage your consumers, right? Like I'm sure Andy and Kevin have seen it as consumers realize that Headspace might, not be around after November if they don't get engaged. Like, one, it's good for business, right? I'm sure sales will tick up, which is, weird, but true. And then, also when you start having thousands of consumers across the state reach out, that's hard to ignore. So reach out to your federal elected official and do that once a week until they're like, all right, we get you. We're good. We get it. We're going to, support this bill. So be annoying. They work for you. So, don't forget that.
Yeah. And I think to Glenn's point, what he was saying earlier remains true. Even if this is not a space that you're in right now, it's always good to have more opportunities to get involved, right? More pathways to innovate your business is never a bad thing, even if you're not currently exercising that right. So it never hurts to get more educated. Always feel free to reach out to obviously the Perfectly Dosed team. I'm sure the CMG team and even Third Space is happy to answer questions too.
Yeah. The last thing I'll add to that on top of what Glenn and Ricky said is that I think consumers, just like it took time to educate them about what these products are and their safety and their legality, they are also uneducated as to the risks of these products going away. I think the average consumer has no idea that come November 13th, the products that they are loving right now might disappear off the store shelf. So, we need to get the word out to consumers so that they can start, making some noise at the congressional level, because we're doing a lot of work lobbying at the industry level, but the consumers maybe aren't yet letting their voice heard, and they don't understand it.
Kevin, did you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to agree earlier when you said if people have questions, they can reach out. Yeah, especially I'm much more versed on the production side than the legal side. I let Andy and Glenn handle that. But if people have production level related questions, happy to be a resource.
Awesome. We appreciate it. I think my final question, and this is just one we love to ask everybody, is what's your current favorite beverage to drink? It doesn't have to be beer. It doesn't have to be THC. What is your current favorite go-to?
I mean, mine is still beer. I'm a beer guy. I love craft beer. I love the products that we're putting out. Upward Spiral, West Coast Style IPA has been my number one product since Kevin put it in front of me as a pilot batch back in 2015 to the one I had last night at the tap room here before I went home. So that's my favorite.
I'm going to say coffee right now. It's been a busy summer.
Coffee's up there. I've been experimenting with 0.4 milligram drinks at home, and I'm enjoying not requiring a lot of THC to feel something. It's been a fun change from the past 20 years.
Yeah, I'm on a similar wave to Glenn, where I've been experimenting more with terpenes and no THC and kind of looking at some of those minor cannabinoids that I've mentioned. And it's a pretty interesting, subtle effect and cool. Excited to see the innovation in that space too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. And
one last thing.
As it's been echoed. Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
What about you, Justine? You can't get out of here without saying what's your favorite drink these days.
I'm a big red wine person. Don't tell my boss. I know it's not the industry, but okay. I love a good red wine.
Yeah. And I'm drinking coffee at 2 p.m. So,
I've got coffee and water going. So
okay, good.
Yeah. But I will say thank you so much to everybody. As it has been echoed throughout this call, if anybody has any questions, they're looking to get into this space, please reach out to your CMG rep. Reach out to Perfectly Dosed, or please reach out to Andy or Kevin at Third Space.
Thanks for having us, Justine. It's been fun chatting.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.